They had repaired all my broken bones 2 days earlier. 3 steel plates, 19 screws, 2 pins. They accidentally severed a sciatic nerve into my left leg, and I began to go backwards. They said, there's no medicine we can give him to start his liver and kidneys. We've kept him alive on life support, but you must sign the papers now. But my mother said, no, we're again going to the prayer room and pray. And I walked through the hallway. I passed doctors and nurses.
Do you remember slipping out of your body?
I don't remember leaving my body. I didn't know I was having an out-of-body experience. But I walked through the hallway and I passed doctors and nurses, and I got close enough to touch them, but I couldn't feel them. And they didn't know I was even there. And I went in this room and I saw my mother on her knees, and she's praying and calling out on Jesus. This was the 3rd time that they gave up on me. And I wasn't a Christian at the time I was in the accident. I didn't know Jesus as my Savior. But I watched my mother pray for me. And I spoke to her, and she looked in my direction, and I knew that something was wrong because she couldn't see me. And she's praying for me. And instantly I knew I had to do what she was doing. And I looked up and I said, Jesus, if you're real, come on the scene and help me, something's wrong. And that's when I felt a huge hand come down and cover the top of my head. And I heard a voice that said, I'm Jesus, I'm real. I'm going to raise you up and give you another chance. Immediately I went back to my body. I didn't see myself walk through the hallways, but I reached for the nurse at the foot of my bed. Or she wasn't prepared for this no more than I was. The last 10-hour death watch, I was swelled up, turned yellow and stinking. I had 400 staples held me together from 9 surgeries, 17 drain tubes, an 18th tube was a feeding tube. My body was swelled as big as a barrel. My dad said my head was as large as a basketball, and he said he had to hold his nose when he come in to see me before they went back to the prayer room. And immediately when I sat up, I reached for the nurse. I didn't know where I was or how long I'd been there, but I immediately knew I had to tell somebody about this hand and this voice.
What did the nurse do?
Well, she turned around and saw me.
You must have driven her sugar crazy.
Well, she turned around and saw me reaching for her, and she jumped about 5 feet because instantly the swelling was gone. I was no longer a vegetable. I had a sound mind. Infections left my body.
You were brain dead, and all of a sudden you had a sound mind.
I had a sound mind. I had 12. She went and got doctors, and 12 doctors stood at the foot of my bed. They asked me all kinds of questions. I communicated on paper, and one miracle right after another.
What about your mother when she found out?
Well, this nurse actually saw that I was trying to speak. I had a tracheotomy in my throat. My mouth was wired shut. I couldn't speak. I didn't know why. And I'm desperately trying to speak to her. And I believe God moved on her to relate to her what had just happened. And she turned her paper over and said, what are you trying to say? And I just scribbled on paper. The ligaments had drawn up in my arms. It took physical therapists several weeks to straighten them out. And I wrote down, scribbled down, is there a church here? She said, you're at Vanderbilt Hospital. You've been in an automobile accident. And I wrote down, it's got red carpet and several pews, and my mom and dad's there praying for me.
Now, had you ever been in that prayer room?
Never been there. I've never been to Vanderbilt Hospital.
All right, because you walked there in the invisible realm, you knew the color of the carpet, you knew they were praying there, so what did she say?
I saw everything in detail. And she read it. She said, there's a prayer room on the first floor. I guess that could be a church, but I don't know what it looks like. Well, she said, it's been a long time since I've been there. And I scribbled down, I know what it looks like, and I know my family's there. I just came from there. Well, that really shook her up. And she motioned for another nurse to take my vital signs, and she went down and got went with another nurse and got my family, told my mother, walked in, my mother said, a nurse walked in and said, is there anyone here in the prayer room, don't mean to interrupt you, but is there anyone here that has a relative by the name of Richard Madison? And my mother stood up and said, that's my son, and we're not making funeral arrangements. We're going to pray until Jesus raises him up. And she said, the nurse said, you must be praying to the real God. Your son just set up out of this coma.
So she comes to see you.
My mother and aunt walk in. They're holding each other by their arm. And they saw me sitting up, and their knees buckled. And they began to weep and cry. And I heard them say, I can't believe it. God really did it. I can't believe it. God really did it. And
she really believed you were going to rise from the dead, but it's when it happened.
Right.
Why did she believe this so strongly?
Well, she said she went into the ladies' room to wash her face, and she saw me all of a sudden in the mirror with a sheet over me, but all of a sudden the sheet dropped down, and she said it looked like, instead of a sheet, it looked like a gown. And she said she believed at that moment that it revealed the Lord's going to raise me up and use me as a minister. And, as I, looked at the doctors and wrote down Jesus and shook it at them and The trauma physician couldn't understand why I was awake, why I had a sound mind, told me he was going to deliver me off the morphine gradually, and I wrote down, Jesus raised me from the dead, I'm not addicted to medicine, because I believed I was instantly set free from cocaine. I didn't want no more cocaine, I didn't want no marijuana, I didn't want no alcohol, and I just assumed and believed, oh, I must not need any morphine. And I wrote that on the paper. The 5th afternoon, the trauma physician came back in. He said, Richard, I pronounced you dead on arrival. Looked me point blank. And he said, you shouldn't be here. He said, you were a vegetable. You seem to have a sound mind. Your neck was broken. We had 3 x-rays showing it broken. Now we have 3 more showing it not broken. We gave you large quantities of blood and large quantities of morphine. And he said, I remember what you wrote on that paper. And he said, never in my medical profession have I ever seen anyone come off the amount of morphine that we gave you cold turkey.
Hold that thought. You think that's something. Wait till you hear the lesson he heard. Really was taught on how to walk in healing. 14 people in comas, 6 brain dead, came back. Don't go away.
We'll be right back to It's Supernatural. We now return to It's Supernatural.
Hello, Sid Roth here with Richard Madison. And Richard was brain dead. For how many days?
27 days.
27 days. His body, he was in a horrible auto accident. Even his broken neck was healed, but there was a problem. They didn't even fool much with his legs because he's brain dead. They don't think it's worth the investment. But a miracle happens. He survives. And what about being in the wheelchair? What did the doctors say about your legs?
Well, they waited 25 days to repair the broken bones, and after repairing them, they accidentally severed the sciatic nerve into my left leg, took 3 bones out of my right foot, and told me that with the 3 steel plates and 19 screws and 2 pins, I probably would never be able to walk. Maybe in a year I could walk with arm crutches. And after leaving the hospital after 49 days, I leave in a wheelchair, and 8 weeks later, I'm praying, I'm learning how to pray, I'm learning how to use the name of Jesus, and
You're really a baby believer at this point.
Baby believer, just I don't know anything. And I start praying. My mouth's wired shut. I said, Jesus, put feeling in my legs and I'll get up and walk. And I heard an audible voice, a whisper, arise and walk. And I said, I know that's Jesus, I know that's you, but I can't walk, I don't have any feeling in my legs. He said, you don't walk by feeling, you walk by faith. And I said, how do you walk by faith? He said, you just trust me and stand up and walk. And I locked the wheels on the wheelchair and I stood up.
But wait, didn't the doctor tell you, according to my notes, that if you did that, you'd mess everything up?
Right. He told me not to even push against anything, even at the foot of the bed, to scoot myself up. Somebody had to move me.
But you knew all of this. Why did you stand up?
I wanted out of the wheelchair.
Okay.
And I just trusted the voice of God. I knew it was Jesus because I knew the enemy wasn't going to tell me I could walk. And as I stood up, I lost my balance and I began to run, and I run through the living room. And I'm trying to grab a hold of something, nothing to grab a hold of, open air. And I run about 30 feet, grab a hold of a door facing, and I stop myself. And I said, Jesus, I just ran out of a wheelchair. I'll never doubt you again. Then I looked around and realized I was about 30 feet from my wheelchair. And I said, oh, Jesus, get me back to my wheelchair.
I'm sure. What happened when the doctors saw you?
Well, I went back to the doctors just a few weeks after that, and the orthopedic surgeon could not believe that I had walked in his office. I actually walked in his office. I had no control over my walking, and my aunt and uncle that I was living with at the time, they went and rented me a walker because I just run to the house and grab a hold of them, about to knock them down, and they got me a walker, and my mother brought